So what an incredible day. Yet another entry into the hidden history of the, in this case, the African warrior. Could be African American only in as much as America was here. It just was not called America. I told you Friday that I was going to tell you about Christopher Columbus's son. And today I'll tell you about it. I had no idea until last week. The first recorded rebellion was in the West Indies. Actually, what is now, basically Santo Domingo. Hispaniola is what it was called then, for Spain. Christopher Columbus, of course, landed there. And so, unknown to me was that he had an older son. His name, Admiral Don Diego Colon, was his name. And he spent some time trying to, get the inheritance from Christopher Columbus. However, it was this great rebellion, the first rebellion there in the West Indies of, Africans, that brought him to fame, or infamy. It happened December 25th, 1522. It was on a sugar plantation that he, Admiral Don Diego Colon, the viceroy of the Indies, and of course Christopher Columbus's son, was in fact in charge. And those men from Senegal, many from Dakar, the place that I visited in January, sought to overthrow their captors. They were crushed, to say the least. However, not before a very great toll was taken on Christopher Columbus's son Diego's men. It makes very interesting reading. It brings new meaning, in my view, to Christopher Columbus. His son was a tyrant, to say the least, not unlike Christopher. Of course, by this time, the slave trade was alive and well, and his son, Diego, made quite a bit of money doing so. And because he was so brutal, the Senegalese sought to overthrow him. This was really the kind of beginning of what's called the Maroons. And the Maroons were those Africans who were, considered as incapable of seasoning. In other words, they were significant fighters. And right now, to this day, in the cockpit area of Jamaica, you will find many of those Maroons, the descendants of those Maroons. Very strong people. Very powerful warriors. All right, where do I start here, folks? It started at the top. A lot happened on Friday. 13 Russians were indicted and their companies. Needless to say, incredible response coming out of Florida. And of course, over the weekend, really ridiculous tweets coming from Donald John. Get Ro to weigh in on that. But first this, folks. Look, you don't have to be a college professor to know this. Many of you have taken issue with me suggesting that Donald John is, in fact, the Manchurian president. Well, I've got proof, cognitive proof. Let me tell you, what Vladimir Putin is doing with the help of Donald John is exactly what Ronald Reagan did with Gorbachev. It actually started with Brezhnev, with Jimmy Carter, and cutting the amount of grain going to Russia. See, that was the Americans had a strategy going way back since World War II, actually, to inhibit or encase, the Russians, basically, to stop them from extending communism and so forth. You guys know this. This is the Cold War kind of stuff. And we took it one step further economically, particularly somewhere in and around the 1970s and all. The idea of containment wasn't enough because the Russians were still intervening. I mean, they North Korea, Vietnam. And so when Jimmy Carter started the grain embargo, it showed that Russia is very, very, very vulnerable economically. They were dependent on grain. You know, let me just tell you, right here in Gulfport, Mississippi, I mean, they were dependent on chickens coming out of the port of Gulfport, and it was good business down there, too, by the way. Yeah, they were very dependent folks. And so you started these kinds of sanctions, we call them now, but they were basically tariffs, and it was putting pressure on the Soviet Union, as it was, to back off being bellicose and supporting, you know, the Serbs, the Viet Cong, the North Koreans, even all the way to the Congo, Angola, you know, by way of Cuba was, you know, they were trying to promote communism. So the United States had this idea. Once it was known that grain affected Russia so desperately, Ronald Reagan capitalized on that in the 1980s. And you got to understand, the Soviet Union was overextended in war in Afghanistan, ironically. They had lost some 10,000 people. I mean, especially after Ronald Reagan decided to do surface-to-air missiles to the Mujahideen, which was the predecessors, of course, to Al-Qaeda. So Ronald Reagan came up with this idea, he along with others, came up with this idea, well, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to see if we can dismantle the Soviet Union and do it economically. And I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, they were quite successful. See, here's what happened. The Soviet Union decided to go in, I'll just read it. The central instrument of putting pressure on the Soviet Union was one Ronald Reagan. And it was the massive defensive buildup, which raised the defense spending some $130 billion in 1980. Much like what Donald John is doing now. It raised it from $134 billion to $253 billion by 1989. This raised American defense spending to 7% of GDP, dramatically increased the federal deficit for us. It did. But it did something else. It drove the Soviet Union out. Oh, I'm going to tell you. They had increased their production and in defense to the point whereby their domestic spending went kaput. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Are you starting to see this?
Yeah.
You see, what happened was the Soviet Union was overextended in Afghanistan, and so they began to increase their spending substantially, thanks to one Ronald Reagan and his whole concept of Star Wars. It was like, whoa, and then we got to keep up with the United States, and so they overspent. They overextended themselves. They did. That combined with the fact, ladies and gentlemen, that there was a shortage of natural gas, thanks to these United States. Shortage of natural gas being dealt with, being supplied to, get this, NATO. So now what they did was they overextended themselves in war. They overspent in defense spending, lowered the amount of spending that they did for domestics, which caused the Soviet Union and the countries therein to really start to squawk. No more block grants, you know, that kind of.
Sounds very familiar.
People began to literally starve there in the Soviet Union, ladies and gentlemen. There was a big disparity between the very rich and the very poor. That combined with the lack of access to some significant goods. And then the dollar, the ruble, began to plummet. And I'm going to tell you, that combined with one other thing, and one other facet that I think you guys will appreciate. We had a propaganda campaign that was very similar to what we're seeing now in this country.
We had a propaganda campaign.
We did. Now, of course, you didn't have internet and so forth at that time. But there was a significant amount of, should I say, double agents or should I say, radio contact, particularly Radio Free America, Radio Free Russia. We began to beam in information into that country, both in newspapers, radio, television. Television became quite prominent then, more prevalent, should I say, not nearly what it is now, but the access to information, let me just tell you, the Iron Curtain wasn't so iron anymore. Information was flowing into Russia. Fake information. Which is how Brezhnev went out and Boris Yeltsin went in. Boris Yeltsin, the drunk. Handpicked in many cases, some suggested by one Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush. But that propaganda campaign combined with the economy going to pot made the Russian people a lot more susceptible, bro.
To the influence?
To the change. Our guy was in. It was our playbook. I can tell you that right off the bat. Yeltsin went in. Of course, Gorbachev went off. Actually, ended up buying a little place here in the United States, to say the least. Made him an offer he couldn't confuse. In other words, there was a promise also to Gorbachev, not unlike the promise that's probably made to one Donald John. What I'm saying to you folks, it takes a minimal amount of investigation to find out what I just did. The playbook. We are heading in the same direction. Now, this is not Rip Daniels spouting off and being Mr. Bleak and Mr. Pessimistic. I'm telling you, if you don't believe me, just check for yourself and you will be astounded by what you see.
Simple historical review.
You know, if you don't learn from the past, you're doomed to relive it. And when I see this, when I read every bit of this, going back to Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, and the economic collapse, the lowering of the ruble, and I go, whoa. They overspent themselves, bro. They were overextended. They had men, Afghanistan, and trying to keep pace. And so when I look back at this and I see that one Vladimir Putin now has got cruise missiles with nuclear warheads, and now I have Donald John who wants to increase and build new every weapon we have, it makes me wonder whether or not we too are heading in that same direction. As I said before, it's not about invading these United States. What Vladimir Putin wants is an ununited states. That's what he wants, because that's what we did to him. It was should I say, a collapse of the Soviet Union, which means, ladies and gentlemen, there was no more union. That's what we have. And which made them no more a superpower. Oh, they still cooperate. They still have a relationship with Mother Russia, to say the least. But it isn't the Soviet Union that it used to be. And if you think that these United States cannot go through a secession whereby states secede, you need to think again. That too is historical. I'm just saying. All right, folks. Let's get to this. That's scary, bro.
That's quite the parallels.
Parallels are quite frightening, and for those of you who just don't see it, trust me on it. You know what gets me about this? I heard that on 60 Minutes, this guy there, they had the pros and cons for Donald John. They had about half and half people who were having this. It's just an encounter session, should I say? And one guy spouted out, "They just got to give him a chance. Chance to do what? What exactly?" I mean, you do realize if he fails, the country fails. I mean, this whole idea of someone was Russian Limbaugh suggesting that they wanted Obama to fail is just, you know, that's just the dumbest thing. And many of you ate it up. You did. I don't want Donald John to fail because this country will fail.
Yeah.
You guys don't think it can. I just demonstrated to you. I just showed you how it could. And it's all economics. It's just all economics. That combined with becoming a country dependent upon imports. By the way, Russia was that country, much like the United States. Did you know that right now that we are exporting far less food? Did you know that?
Yes, I did know that. Came across that information recently, yeah.
Well, that was the Soviet Union's undoing. All right, I'm moving on. I know you guys don't preoccupied with that. That's fascinating to me.
That's the parallels. I mean, to look at them then versus us now, there's certain things you just cannot deny.
Yep. And this is why I think he is the Manchurian president. He is going along with exactly what Vladimir Putin is saying. So, and then this right here, 13 Russians indicted and companies. We're talking criminally here. Somewhere around 4 or 5 o'clock, maybe 5 o'clock Eastern time. Was it Rosenberg, Rosenthal, whatever, Rosenstein, the deputy at the Justice Department? He came forward and he released this, and I got this. I read through this, and if you do nothing else, if you like spy novels, you need to read this.
Yeah.
You need to read this, folks. This is incredible. It is really incredible, the detail to which the FBI determined and has cognitive proof, evidence of what transpired. I mean, it's propaganda, no doubt, but it's more than that. It's criminal because many of you could have had your identity stolen. I mean, it was a serious situation. You have at least 100 to 200 Russians who became citizens of this country, buying, shopping like citizens. And what they did was manipulate both sides. But especially after Donald John became the Republican nominee, I mean, it became obvious there were some people who were gullible and they were just dumb. And there were also people who had a propensity, because of their bigotry, was just wide open. Look, folks, I'm going to tell you. I want to put up this thing on the rallies here from Rosenstein when he was saying what happened with Donald John and President-elect. Just how, this is President-elect. You got to understand, this is after the election. And what is this, page number 27? Number 26, one of them. Just listen to how Rosenstein spells out what the Russians are doing and why they're doing it, and how they manipulated both pro and anti-Trump folks even after the election. Listen to this.
The Russians also recruited and paid real Americans to engage in political activities, promote political campaigns, and stage political rallies. The defendants and their co-conspirators pretended to be grassroots activists. According to the indictment, the Americans did not know that they were communicating with Russians. After the election, the defendants allegedly staged rallies to support the president-elect, while simultaneously staging rallies to protest his election.
Yep.
For example, the defendants organized one rally to support the president-elect and another rally to oppose him, both in New York on the same day. On September 13th of 2017, soon after the news media reported that the special counsel's office was investigating evidence that Russian operatives had used social media to interfere with the 2016 election, one defendant allegedly wrote, quote, "We had a slight crisis here at work. The FBI busted our activity. So I got preoccupied with covering tracks together with my colleagues."
Folks, let me just tell you something. This is just incredible. This guy, Matt Skeever, manipulated just about every Republican conservative in Florida. The Florida for Trump, which is a Russian organization, manipulated even the White House. I mean, it's just incredible how they spelled this out. Chair for the Trump campaign in Florida. On August 15, 2016, defendants and their co-conspirators received an email at one of their false U.S. persona accounts from a real U.S. person, a Florida-based political activist identified as the chair for the Trump campaign. In particular, this is happening in one of the Florida counties. The activist identified 2 additional sites. Now you got to understand, they were Russian, but they were white. I want to make that very, very clear. I didn't put quotes around it. Okay, I'll put them. Every one of these individuals, ladies and gentlemen, were able to manipulate conservative/white folks in quotes because they were. They were believable and they spoke the language. I'm just going to tell you. In every one of these situations, this is what you have. Don't get me wrong. African Americans were paid in Philadelphia and in parts of Detroit to actually start, in one situation, to give the impression that somehow or another African Americans were arming themselves and going through some kind of training to come in and take over. And let me just tell you, I mean, when you read through this, it is just so vivid. Even this one about Clinton. Beginning on August 5th, defendants and their co-conspirators used a false U.S. persona at March for Trump Twitter account to recruit and later pay a real U.S. person to wear a costume portraying Clinton in a prison uniform at a rally at West Palm Beach?
You kidding me?
No.
What?
No. In other words, this was manipulation, not unlike what we did there in the Soviet Union. But now, there are those of you who say, oh, turnabout's fair play. No, it's not. This is my country.
Whose side you on?
That absolutely. What we did, we did. And it worked. I wanted a dismantled Soviet Union. I don't want to dismantle the United States. Oh, yeah, well, you see, Rip, that's just how it is. We did it to them, they did it to us. As if somehow or another it doesn't affect you. Are you kidding me? Their guy won. Their guy sitting in the White House and you're going, okay, well, the chickens have come home to roost. You think that doesn't affect you? Just ridiculous. You need to read through this. You Americans, you get me. You guys just think, what, that somebody else is going to control this? You've got a guy in the White House now that's trying to cut every social program you can name. By the way, if you think that that only affects the poor, think again. Who do you think the poor spends money with? Just think about it just about 2 seconds. You wouldn't have a middle class if you didn't have the poor. And I could prove it. You want to challenge me on it? Call me. Let's just see how many poor people go next door and spend money with poor people. Let's just see how many of those folks who are getting Section 8 or food stamps. Oh yeah, well, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go trade with with cousin Eli over here. And now the president is looking to cut the home heating. Did you see that?
I did.
Don't get me wrong, folks. I mean, you would think, okay, well, it's not a bad thing, right? Okay, right. Who do you think controls that? The home heating program. He wants to eliminate heating assistance because these fellows is brought with fraud. Prove it. The same thing he need to prove when you start talking about the fraud with voting. He doesn't have to prove anything for you Trumpettes. You just gobble that up, don't you? Oh, Ripley's just got it in for him. This man is lying through his teeth, and you just somehow or another what? I mean, I was watching this thing on 60 Minutes with Oprah, and something came out that I thought was very, very real. You see, there are those of us who listen to what Donald John says and read what he says and understands it verbally, right? Their words have definition.
Yeah, what he said.
But when you hear a Trumpster, they talk about what he meant.
They interpret.
As if somehow or another the words don't mean anything.
Well,
But this is what he meant. What he meant was, I mean, it's amazing. So, all right, I'm moving. I know I've got the Panther. You've got your outfits over there on. I don't. Well, you have yours on. I don't see. I guess Whitlock has not gone to see it yet. She doesn't have hers on. Yeah.
Call me out then.
Absolutely. All right, sure.
Just call me out. There you go.
All right. Of course, then you had the Donald John taking issue with his own Secretary of Defense Mathers.
They're on your side. You pick these people.
Where do you get this guy? I don't want to look at this. Is the whole list of you have them over there, the tweets, do you not?
I do.
I mean, do we really have to? This guy, he did this all the way up until 12 midnight last night, huh?
He says he doesn't sleep. Doesn't sleep at all.
Jeez, man, could you imagine this? The majority of the Russians' ads happened after the election. I mean, you know.
If it was the goal of Russia to create discord, disruption, and chaos within the U.S., then with all of the committee hearings, investigations, and party hatred, they had succeeded. beyond their wildest dreams.
Let me tell you something, folks. I don't know how you guys, all you got to do is listen to what he accuses people of, and you got to understand that's what he's done. That's usually how it is. It's always, and then look, it's a simple task in my view, showing collusion, because he invited it out of his own mouth. Hey, Russia, go ahead. I mean, it invited it out of his own pen, little chubby fingers typing to his son as they met with the Russians. But that's not the thing that bothers. It's not political for me. It is, what is the objective of Vladimir Putin?
For the country.
And thwarting his objective. In other words, we can't go with this. So now what you're going to have, I think just recently we had the same thing. Brookhaven suggested that there was Caucasians across the street in Brookhaven. Have you found that?
Yeah, no, I have still not found a confirmation.
There was the trolls and possibly Russian or Klan, you can't tell the difference. Floating it that African Americans were beating up Caucasians on the way to see Black Panther.
Yeah, across the country, false troll articles. One even used Rob Porter's ex-wife's beating photo as an instance of this.
Let me tell you, folks,
false violence.
what they're playing on is your bigotries and your prejudices and your preconceived notions of other people here. That's what they're doing. They're weaponizing it, and there are some of you who are allowing it. And you're allowing it simply because you're not qualified. Let me tell you, the internet is now wrought with gossip, fake news. You can't just take stuff off of there and go, oh yeah, well. And then one friend, I got it from J-Bo, and J-Bo got it off the internet, and so where did it come from exactly? The students there in Florida now are calling for a march on the 24th. What do you think, Whitlock? You think that other students are going to participate? March against guns?
I think so. I think
Do
think
you?
people are getting to the point now where they realize that we have a problem. Some have already, but I think people that have been quiet or neutral now, they're speaking up, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. All right, 228-896-9455 here, folks. I'm going to get you guys. I promise you I am. We got a lot to cover, short period of time. So LeBron James weighed in on, what's her name?
Yeah, what's her name?
We won't call her name because she's really such a subordinate little dweeb, in my view. You know, we don't talk about other talk show hosts here, folks. And you know, there's some folks who you really think you can defend a buffoon and not sound buffoonish. I mean, really and truly. On the other hand, you just gotta wonder. You just gotta wonder where the arrogance comes from. Let me just tell you, I think that there's a lot of hate going on, going all the way back to NASA, when it's revealed that when given an opportunity, African Americans will excel. All you gotta do is give them an opportunity, period. And whatever the category, academia, space, technology, when given the opportunity. I mean, history has shown that, Ro, every time. When African Americans were denied playing basketball, you see what happened once that changed. Denied by white supremacists.
Any sport, any action.
Really inferiority. It wasn't white supremacists, white inferiority.
Right.
So, I want to go ahead and play this. Go ahead and play what's her name, and then play LeBron James. Somebody give him a lot of respect. He has not been silent since he has reached his fame, and to which I'd say that is a great thing.
Well, I want to make sure that we get LeBron's actual statement in, because she had a parsed comment whenever she did talk about what LeBron actually said. So it's very important that we know exactly what he really said before we,
This is when he was in the car.
Right, he's doing an
He was talking about the president not knowing the people.
Right.
Yeah.
These were his actual comments here.
Yeah.
Job in America, the point of person is someone who doesn't understand the people and really don't give a fuck about the people. When I was growing up, there were like 3 jobs that you look for inspiration, or you feel like these were the people that could give me life. It was the President of the United States, it was whoever was the best in sports, and then it was like the greatest musician at the time. You never thought you could be them, but you can grab inspiration from. I feel like I could be You know, it was a neighborhood African-American cop, and he was cool as hell, come around. You know, I felt like I could be him. Yeah, I could be him, but I never felt I could be the president of the United States, but I grabbed inspiration from that. And this time right now, with the president of the United States, it's at a bad time. And while we cannot change what comes out of that man's mouth, we can continue to alert the people that watch us, that listen to us, as this is not the way.
Now let me make sure you understand. This is a father. This is a son. He's an uncle. He's a businessman. He is a voter and a citizen of these United States before he's even a basketball player. That's what some people don't grasp, like Miss Ingram.
We're going to create a new banner. This is a jump doc alert. Must they run their mouths like that? Unfortunately, a lot of kids and some adults take these ignorant comments seriously. Look, there might be a cautionary lesson in LeBron for kids. This is what happens when you attempt to leave high school a year early to join the NBA. And it's always unwise to seek political advice from someone who gets paid $100 million a year to bounce a ball. Oh, and LeBron and Kevin, you're great players, but no one voted for you. Millions elected Trump to be their coach. So keep the political commentary to yourself, or as someone once said, shut up and dribble.
All right, simple question. So how would you respond? Without using her name, by the way. You see what this is let me tell you, the Trumpettes will, it doesn't matter. What I heard from LeBron was, you know what? Character matters. He's the guy who just said, yeah, I could be the cop, but I just never thought I could be the president or one of the musicians or even a sports guy like he is. Sports star. But he became that. You know, folks, let me just say this. She gets paid on Fox to do exactly what she just did. If for her to say anything else would not confirm in the small minds of her listeners or her viewers what they want to believe, and that's this. Their guy is all right. No matter how bad he is, he's not nearly as bad as LeBron. The kind of stuff you used to find on that sign in the Broke Spoke there in the Kill, Mississippi. At least I'm not like those folks who living behind the Broke Spoke. Hang on to the phones. We'll be back.
Why live in a dumb home when you could live in a smart home from Vivint? What's the difference between a dumb home and a